Hi everyone. The evening breeze drifted softly through the streets of Montevideo, carrying the scent of the ocean and the rhythm of Latin life. Between rows of old cafes and colonial buildings stood a new mosque, its white dome glowing gently under the golden sunset. Then came the sound of the adhan, the Islamic call to prayer, rising gracefully over the city. It wasn't loud, yet it seemed to echo deep within the hearts of everyone who heard it. For many, that sound marked something extraordinary. In a country once known as one of the most secular nations in the world, a quiet spiritual revolution was taking place. Every week, dozens, sometimes hundreds of Uruguayans came to the mosque, curious to learn about Islam. At universities, professors and students gathered to discuss the Quran and its timeless message of morality and justice. In the marketplaces, greetings of Assalamu alaikum were heard more often, exchanged with warm smiles. From the capital to the countryside, stories of new converts or reverts were spreading rapidly. They came from every walk of life: artists, teachers, doctors, students. Many of them spoke of a deep inner peace they never felt before. "I used to chase freedom in everything," said Sophia, a former feminist activist who now wears the hijab proudly. "But I only found true freedom when I surrendered to Allah." The government, too, began to notice this rising tide. New mosques were being built in Montevideo, Salto, and Paysandú. Local media started sharing the inspiring journeys of those who had embraced Islam, stories filled with reflection, struggle, and transformation. Uruguay, once defined by its beaches and football passion, was quietly becoming something more. A land touched by faith, where hearts once distant from God were now turning toward His light. And as the last rays of the sun faded over the South Atlantic, the call to prayer echoed once more. A reminder that even in the farthest corners of the earth, the truth of Islam finds its way to every soul ready to listen. It began quietly, not with grand speeches or mass conversions, but with simple conversations in cafes, classrooms, and online forums. Young Uruguayans, raised in an environment where religion was often dismissed as outdated, began to question what it truly meant to live with purpose. Among them was Diego Martinez, a philosophy student from Montevideo. He had grown up believing that faith was a weakness, something that belonged to the past. But one night, while scrolling through global news about Gaza and humanitarian crises, he came across a video of Muslims praying amidst ruins, calm, focused, unbroken. "That night changed something in me," Diego recalled. "I realized that no matter how much the world tried to break them, their faith gave them strength I couldn't understand." Curiosity led him to a local Islamic center, where he met Imam Abdur Rahman, a gentle man originally from Morocco, who had been living in Uruguay for over 20 years. The Imam's words were simple but powerful. "Islam isn't about where you come from. It's about where your heart chooses to return." From that day, Diego began to study the Quran. The verses, translated to Spanish, spoke to him in a language deeper than words, about justice, mercy, and the unity of all creation. Soon others followed the same path. University students started small study groups, reading Islamic philosophy alongside Western thinkers like Nietzsche and Camus. Journalists began writing about Islam's rise in Uruguay, not as a political movement, but as a spiritual awakening. In the city of Salto, a local teacher named Mariana opened a free Arabic and Quran class every Sunday. Within months, her classroom was filled with people from all backgrounds, from elderly Catholics curious about Islam to young atheists searching for peace. By 2025, Uruguay had witnessed something unprecedented. New mosques were being built, prayer rooms opened inside universities, and even interfaith gatherings became more common. Muslims, once seen as strangers, were now becoming part of Uruguay's modern identity. "Faith doesn't erase who we are," Diego said, now wearing a modest beard and helping at the mosque every weekend. "It just helps us see who we were meant to be." The seeds had been planted, and though the journey had only just begun, Uruguay was no longer the same. A quiet transformation was unfolding, one soul at a time. By the time the world began to notice, the movement in Uruguay was no longer just a whisper, it was a voice. What began in quiet mosques and student gatherings had become a nationwide conversation. International journalists flew into Montevideo, curious about what they called the unexpected rise of Islam in Latin America's most secular nation. Cameras followed young converts as they performed their first prayers, captured moments of tears, peace, and awe, scenes that spread across social media and reached millions around the globe. In Europe, Muslim communities watched in wonder. In Africa and the Middle East, imams spoke about Uruguay during Friday sermons. And in neighboring Argentina and Brazil, people began to ask, could this be the start of something bigger? Yet, not everyone welcomed the change. Some political commentators warned that religion could divide Uruguay's famously liberal society. Online, debates grew fierce between those who feared the return of faith and those who had finally found meaning through it. But through the noise, the Muslims of Uruguay remained calm. They understood something deeper. Faith doesn't spread through argument, it spreads through character. Imam Abdul Rahman reminded his students, the Prophet never forced belief, he simply showed mercy, and mercy is what the heart remembers. At the newly built Masjid al-Nur, the Mosque of Light, hundreds gathered for Friday prayers. The sound of the adhan echoed across Montevideo's skyline, blending with the hum of traffic and sea breeze. Inside, the congregation was a mosaic of faces, Uruguayans, Arabs, Africans, even Europeans who had moved to South America seeking peace. When they bowed together, language, race, and background disappeared. Only unity remained. News networks began calling it La Ola Espiritual, the spiritual wave. They couldn't explain it politically, economically, or socially. It was something beyond statistics, a quiet return to the truth written in every human soul. In the evenings, after the prayers, young Muslims would walk along the Rambla, the long coastal road of Montevideo, sharing tea and stories under the stars. They spoke of dreams, to open Islamic schools, orphanages, and cultural centers that could show Islam not just as a religion, but as a way of life built on compassion and justice. And somewhere in that night breeze, between the sound of the waves and the laughter of believers, Uruguay's destiny was being rewritten, not by power or politics, but by hearts illuminated with faith. The light of faith had spread far and wide, but with light always comes shadow. As Islam's presence grew stronger in Uruguay, the first real challenges began to surface. It started with whispers. Some newspapers published opinion pieces calling Islam foreign and incompatible with Uruguayan values. Talk shows debated whether the growing Muslim community could change the culture. Online, hateful comments appeared beneath videos of converts, mocking their decision, questioning their loyalty. For many new Muslims, it was their first real test. Sophia, who once walked the streets of Montevideo freely without her hijab, now noticed the stares. Some people turned away, others whispered as she passed. But she smiled through it all. "When you know who you are," she said softly, "the world can't make you doubt it." Diego, too, faced difficulties. His own family couldn't understand why he would abandon everything they had believed in. His father stopped speaking to him for months. Yet Diego kept visiting, helping around the house and leaving short notes of kindness on the kitchen table. One morning, his father found a note that read, "Faith didn't take me away from you, Papa. It brought me closer." That night, they finally spoke again. This time, not about religion, but about love, truth, and understanding. Meanwhile, at Masjid al-Nur, attendance grew despite the tension. The mosque became more than a place of prayer. It was a sanctuary for courage. Imam Abdul Rahman often reminded them during Friday sermons, "Every generation of believers faces a test. Ours is not persecution by sword, but misunderstanding by hearts. Meet hatred with patience, and you will see how mercy conquers all." Inspired by his words, the community began outreach programs, inviting non-Muslims to open discussions, offering food to the poor regardless of faith, and volunteering during floods that struck parts of the city. Slowly, the perception began to change. Local journalists who once doubted them started writing stories titled "The Kind Hands of Montevideo's Muslims." Children who once mocked hijabi girls at school now played football with them after class. Through struggle, Islam in Uruguay was no longer just a belief, it became an identity, a living example of peace in the face of adversity. And though the challenges continued, the believers stood firm, like candles in the wind, their light flickering, yet never extinguished. Because they knew that every trial was not a punishment, it was a calling. Years had passed since the first whispers of Islam spread through Uruguay. What began as a few hearts searching for meaning had grown into a nationwide awakening, calm, steady, and unstoppable. Montevideo, once known only for its beaches and music, now held another sound in its heart, the azan echoing at sunrise, calling believers to prayer. The skyline had changed. Where once there stood only churches and office towers, a magnificent new mosque now rose near the Rio de la Plata, Masjid al-Fajr, the Mosque of Dawn. Its architecture blended modern elegance with Andalusian grace, symbolizing unity between Latin and Islamic heritage. The day of its opening drew thousands, Muslims, Christians, atheists, and Jews, all standing together as the doors opened. When Imam Abdul Rahman stepped forward, his voice trembled with emotion. "Years ago, this was a dream whispered in a few hearts. Today, it is a promise fulfilled." Islam did not arrive here through force, but through peace, through the hearts that chose light over emptiness. The crowd fell silent as the first azan echoed from the new minaret, its sound floating over the city and out toward the sea. Even those who did not understand Arabic felt something move within them, a calmness, a sense of return. Among them stood Diego, now a respected teacher of Islamic philosophy, and Sophia, who ran an orphanage supported by the Muslim community. Their eyes met briefly, filled with tears, not of sadness, but of gratitude. Children ran through the courtyards laughing, while elders prayed quietly under the golden dome. Uruguay, the small, secular nation of the South, had become a symbol of coexistence, of how faith could flourish without division. And soon, the government recognized Islam officially as one of the country's major religions. Islamic holidays were respected, and schools began teaching about world faiths, including Islam, from a lens of understanding rather than fear. And as night fell over Montevideo, the lights of Masjid al-Fajr shimmered across the water, a reflection of faith, resilience, and peace. Uruguay had changed forever, not through conquest, not through politics, but through hearts awakened by truth. In the end, Imam Abdul Rahman said in his final sermon, "We did not bring Islam to Uruguay, Allah did. We were only the winds that carried His message." And so the dawn over Montevideo was not just another sunrise, it was the beginning of a new chapter for a nation, for its people, and for every soul who believed that light can rise even from the farthest corner of the earth. The years turned like pages in a book. Uruguay had entered a new era, not of revolution, but of renewal. The azan now rose gently across cities at dawn, blending with the cries of seagulls and the rhythm of the waves. In Montevideo, Masjid al-Fajr stood tall, its lights shimmering like stars upon the ocean. It had become more than a mosque. It was a heartbeat, a reminder that faith could bloom even in places no one expected. Tourists came from all over the world, curious to see how Islam had taken root in the heart of South America. They found not extremism, not fear, but warmth, smiles, and peace. Inside the mosques, Qurans in Spanish lined the shelves. Children recited verses fluently, their voices soft but confident. In schools, the word Islam no longer brought confusion, it brought respect. And yet those who had witnessed the beginning never forgot the struggle. Sophia often sat by the seaside after Maghrib, watching the horizon where the sea met the sky. She would whisper prayers for those still searching for truth, remembering her own journey from doubt to faith. Diego sometimes joined her, carrying a notebook filled with reflections, part philosophy, part prayer. Together they would sit in silence, listening to the wind and waves. "It's strange," Diego said once, smiling faintly. "Years ago, I used to look at this same ocean and see emptiness. Now, I see signs of God in every wave." Sophia nodded. Because the sea never stops returning to its shore, just like the heart always finds its way back to the one who made it. In time, Uruguay became a model for peaceful coexistence, a nation where mosques and churches stood side by side, and the call to prayer was seen not as a division, but a melody of unity. Imam Abdul Rahman passed away quietly one winter morning. At his funeral, thousands came, Muslims, Christians, Jews and atheists, all to honor the man who had taught them that belief was not about walls, but bridges. As his students lowered him into the earth, the ocean breeze carried the sound of the azan once more. It was soft, almost like a whisper, the same whisper that started it all. And in that moment, every soul present felt it, that Islam in Uruguay was never just a story about conversion. It was a story of return. The return of hearts to peace, the return of light to a land once covered in silence. The waves continued to crash gently against the shore, eternal and endless. And somewhere in their rhythm, one could almost hear it, the whisper of faith carried by the wind.